In a React application, everything is made up of self-contained components. Components are the building blocks in React. Developing applications using components allows a divide and conquer approach. We divide our bigger application into smaller components and smaller components again to further small components and conquer them or solve them. Then finally combine these small components together to create our bigger application. Dividing a complicated problem into smaller problems and solving smaller problems is something that we do very often in almost everything, and it's a very natural thing to do. That brings us to our next question: what are components? Let me take a couple of real-world examples to explain what components are and why components are really a good way to develop user interfaces. For example, suppose if you want to start manufacturing laptops, how would you do it? Laptop is a complex piece of hardware. We can't possibly manufacture a laptop in a single shot, right? So what do? We break that laptop component into several small components like RAM, hard drive, keyboard, screen, motherboard, etc. We solve each of these problems individually, like creating our own RAM component or take already created RAMs from other manufacturers. Similarly, we build other parts individually and finally assemble all these solutions together to form a laptop. Since we have broken down problems into smaller parts, we can achieve great reusability. If someone has already solved a problem and that solution works for me, then I can just reuse the solution from someone else. Let me explain that with an example. We definitely need hard drive component for our laptop, but we don't want to invest our time to manufacture hard drives if we don't need to. I can just get the manufactured hard drives and compose it in my laptop. Because of reusability, I can release a variety of laptops with different looks and specifications by just using already solved problems like RAM, hard drive, etc. Imagine how difficult it would have been to create a laptop in a single shot without breaking down into smaller parts. This is how we fundamentally work. We break down a problem into smaller pieces, solve them, and fit together these pieces to solve a bigger problem. Let me take another real-world example. How do we solve this car manufacturing problem? Again, we break that car component into several smaller components like tires, engine, steering, car body, etc. and some decoration components like music player, GPS navigation, etc. And then we finally combine all these individual and mostly unrelated components together to solve a problem as complicated as manufacturing the car. And this is what React is all about. It allows us to build UI in terms of components. We break down our UI into smaller UI components and compose them together to form a complete application view. So let's look at some UI application and try to solve and break down the problem by thinking in terms of components. This is the newsfeed app that we'll be building in the third part of this course. What I want you to do right now is to think about breaking this app down to components. By just looking at the UI, we can try to imagine what would be the components when building this application in React. The key design choice that we make when building a React application is what are the components. Okay, did you figure out what can be the possible components? Let me go through it. There is no standard guideline as such that we need to break our components in this format only. What I'm going to do here is to just explain you one way of breaking it down. You can break it down into several different ways. It's up to us. But the more refined, the more smaller and independent you make your component structure, the more flexible it will be to adjust and reuse that component at a later point of time. For starters in React, because everything is a component, this entire application UI itself is a component. We start looking at this top header and say the navigation bar or header is one component. The newsfeed search bar itself is a component. The list of news items is a component, and that list is made up of individual news item, so the individual news item is also a component. Finally, I can make this footer pager also as a component. All of these live inside that main application component. And then when we build the UI, we are composing all these components together in order to allow React to determine what the DOM or web page should look like, and then make the updates to the DOM to render output to the web page. React really encourages us to think about our application by breaking it down in components that can be reused not just in the same application, but in multiple applications also. We can see a footer pager here in our newsfeed app, and since we have separated the pager into a component, we can reuse it in another React application where some similar pager is required. It also encourages us to have well-defined application structure, strengthens modularity and reusability. And this modular, granular, and well-defined way makes it much easier to rebuild and redesign the applications in future. React way of building UI turned out to be a really good way of building user interfaces, not just for the browser, but also for other environments like mobile, desktop, etc. React isn't the first one to present the idea of components. But React is certainly the one which popularized the idea of building UI in components. So much that Angular 2, Ember 2, Vue.js 2 all adopted the idea of components. Alright, let's move on.